Welcome to another episode of Inflection. I'm your co-host, Brian Berletic. Joining me, as always, is Angelo Giuliano. Hello, Angelo. How are you?
Brian, all good. Always nice to have this show. Just enjoying, always.
Great. And today we've got a lot to cover. We're going to talk about the 100-year anniversary of the Chinese Communist Party. And we're going to talk about how, for the West, this is a really hard pill to swallow, and we'll get into all of that. But first, let's start going over some of the news that's been unfolding. We've talked a lot about Myanmar, and we bring up Myanmar all the time because it's very undercovered. And we've talked about how the Western media was lying, how they said it was peaceful pro-democracy protests. We warned that they were violent from the very beginning and that eventually it would end in armed violence, just like in Libya and Syria in 2011. And now that has happened, and the Western media is even admitting that the opposition is armed with war weapons and it's armed combat against the Myanmar's military and police. And now, just like in Libya and Syria, now the opposition is they're committing quite a number of atrocities, and the UN is not able to cover it all up or ignore it. So this is from the UN in Myanmar. They're alarmed at the sharp deterioration of human rights environment. One such case is the discovery of two mass graves in Miyawadi Township, containing the human remains of 25 people who had reportedly been detained on the 31st May by the Karen National Defense Organization. I've talked about these ethnic armed groups before, how the US and the British armed and backed them and trained them from during World War II all the way to the end, up to present day. When you see them fighting government troops, oftentimes they have M16s. Where did those come from, if not from the US? And these Karen armed ethnic organizations that David Eubanks from the Free Burma Rangers, that's who he sneaks into Myanmar from Thailand to give military training to, and to bring supplies in for, and then also to do his propaganda campaign for. So this is them filling up mass graves. This is going on. There's a lot that the UN and the Western media isn't talking about that I have sources sending me information about. It's really nasty stuff, and we were trying to warn people about this, that this is where it was all headed. And then the next step is, if the military is not able to gain control, we're going to see another Libya or Syria. It's just going to get worse and worse. Angelo, do you have anything to say about this?
I think this is the stage where they're building up fear. So it's a radicalization, and people, when you are a regular citizen, what you're trying to do is just bringing food on the table, and you want to make sure that your family is in security. Now you have this is the step where the building of fear, just making sure that the population is going to stay put, doesn't move, and just to make it they're going into a vicious circle. When you are doing terrorism, what are you expecting? That there's going to be this is already civil war. We've been talking about this all along, and I think it's important also to give the context to people. Why do we have this? It's because of foreign interference. This was all planned a long time ago. We're talking about 20 years of U.S. meddling, Western meddling into Burma, and the hijacking of Myanmar's democracy. So I think it's very important all along just to give the context. Why are we in this situation? This is no different to what they did in Libya, in Syria, just meddling and just creating a civil war.
Exactly. And again, this all started in February of this year when Myanmar's military took over, and the Western media acted as if, they're ousting a democratically elected government. There was nothing democratic about it at all. The government headed by Aung San Suu Kyi and her National League for Democracy were a product of foreign interference, not democratic elections. And Aung San Suu Kyi herself, as state councilor or chancellor, whatever the fake made up title she gave herself, because by law she was not allowed to head the government. So she just made up an office for herself. She had Australian and British citizens advising her on rewriting the constitution, restructuring the legal system, and Myanmar's economic policies. This would be unthinkable in any sovereign country. And to have British citizens advising them when they are a former British colony is just absolutely outrageous. So it's, like the Myanmar's military had no choice, but the Western media is never going to explain any of this context. They're just going to pretend that Aung San Suu Kyi was this democratically elected leader and how horrible it is that she was ousted, and they're going to do everything to get her back into power. And again, just like you said, like Libya, like Syria, an ocean of lies to drown the truth of what they are really trying to do, and the fact that this is going to lead to a failed state potentially in the heart of Asia. And why are they doing this? Is it just about Myanmar? No, it's because of China. China was building its one Belt, One Road project, was running through Myanmar amongst many other nations, and this is to disrupt that, to disrupt the relationship between Myanmar and China. It's part of a wider encirclement campaign. We'll talk about that because the main topic is China's rise. Let's see, what else do we have in the news? Well, again, Myanmar now is opposition media. It's not Myanmar state media. It's funded by the US government, and its purpose is to support the opposition and this armed resistance to the government. And this is them reporting that snack vendor accused of acting as military informant shot dead in Insen Township. And this is them trying to justify what was just cold-blooded murder in the streets by this Western-backed opposition. They have death squads. They go out. They hunt people down who they perceive as supporting the government. They're killing these people in the streets. It's to create a climate of fear, and because no one else is joining the opposition. This is to at least get people fearful enough to stop working with the government, if not to join the opposition. And we saw this in Libya and Syria, just death squads combing through towns and cities. And then here is Myanmar's military trying to restore order. That's what they're doing. They're not cracking down on peaceful protesters. And this is opposition media admitting to that. So very sad. I got in the video description, we're going to include the articles about the opposition attacking schools and admitting that that's what they're doing. So people can get a good feel of what's going on in Myanmar, just like we warned months ago. Let's go to this. So the U.S. is bombing targets on the Syrian-Iraqi border. And this is a statement by the Department of Defense. And they're saying, at President Biden's direction, the U.S. military forces earlier this evening conducted defensive precision airstrikes against facilities used by Iran-backed militia groups in the Iraq-Syria border region. They are saying how, let's see, they are in Iraq at the invitation of the government of Iraq for the sole purpose of assisting the Iraqi security forces in their efforts to defeat ISIS. So that's how they're justifying their actually illegal presence in Iraq. They're also in Syria completely illegally and definitely not at the invitation of the Syrian government. And then they talk about, as a matter of domestic law, the president took this action pursuant to his Article 2 authority to protect U.S. personnel in Iraq, thousands of miles from U.S. shores. So this is problematic on so many levels. Angelo, do you want to start digging in here?
Well, this is ridiculous. Well, remember, there was a vote of the Iraqi parliament. So now there's a democracy in Iraq. There was a vote in the parliament that to say that that said that they wanted the U.S. to leave Iraq, and there was unanimity. I mean, unanimity vote saying, well, why don't you leave? You need to leave Iraq now. and now they're talking about the invitation of Iraq. It was never an invitation. And again, this is we have those illegal wars, but not only on international standards, also for American laws. As you know, in the Constitution of the United States, it says that you need to have the approval of the Congress to go into a war. And this is a continuation of the war against terrorism. But every time, so they need to pretend that they are terrorists that are threatening the US, but it's not. I mean, how people can threaten the US from Iraq or from Syria, when actually in reality the real terrorists are the ones that are funded by the US. ISIS, we all know it's been financed by the US. It's a US creation, as well as Al Qaeda. So it's just hypocrisy. It's just hypocrisy. But it's getting very hard just to justify it. They need to invent stories. And it doesn't work. It's just disgusting.
It is, and let's take a look at some of that. So right after the attacks, and after the U.S. claimed that it's there at the invitation of the Iraqi government, this is from New York Times. This is regarding those attacks. Baghdad condemned American airstrikes on Iranian-controlled militias that have been harrying U.S. operations in Iraq, fearing an escalation. It's all about how the Iraqi government condemned this attack as a violation of their sovereignty. They also note that these militias are on the payroll of the Iraqi government. So actually, these militias were the ones helping Iraq and also Syria defeat ISIS, Al-Qaeda, Al-Nusra, and all the other extremist groups that the West and its regional allies were sponsoring from even before the war. And I'll get to that in a minute. And they're saying that they are in Iraq at the invitation of the Iraqi government. No, they're not. They invaded illegally in 2003 and they never left. There were some drawdowns, but they never left. It's not like they left and then they came back. They have always been there since 2003. And this is from 2004, The Guardian. Iraq war was illegal and breached UN charter, says Annan. And this is Kofi Annan, then the United Nations Secretary General. It was absolutely illegal. There was no UN Security Council approval, and it was against the UN's founding charter, obviously. It was a war of aggression predicated on fabricated claims of weapons of mass destruction, which, again, is a lie that they're trying to recycle in Syria, literally the next country over from Iraq. And you were just saying about the terrorists, how the terrorists were created by the West. And it's not a byproduct of a flawed foreign policy. It was done very deliberately. So let's start here. In leaked email, Clinton claims Saudi and Qatari governments fund ISIS. Okay, Saudi Arabia and Qatar are US allies. They really wouldn't exist the way they do now without constant US support. She says, we need to use our diplomatic and more traditional intelligence assets to bring pressure on the governments of Qatar and Saudi Arabia, which are providing clandestine financial and logistic support to ISIL and other radical Sunni groups in the region. And I'm not really sure how clandestine it was, because it was obvious they were doing this as early as 2011. I was warning people about this. So how clandestine could it have been? But this is interesting because a year later after that email leak, here's this New York Times article, behind the sudden death of a $1 billion secret CIA war in Syria. That's what the war was. It wasn't a civil war. It was a CIA dirty war. And right here, reports that some of the CIA supplied weapons had ended up in the hands of rebel groups tied to Al-Qaeda. So that was Clinton blaming Saudi Arabia and Qatar. But here are CIA weapons also getting into the hands of Al-Qaeda. Was that all an accident? They tried to pretend that it was. But of course, Angelo, they've been in Iraq for 10 years by the time the Syrian conflict started. Surely they knew who all these groups were, right?
But you see, look at the New York Times. When they are building a case for war, they're backing the government, the U.S. government, the U.S. State Department. But the truth comes out way too late. They end up coming with the truth, but way too late on purpose. So they're just being a tool of the military-industrial complex. Well, now we see the trend now. The last 20 years, what the US has been doing is trying not to fight their own wars. They learned from the experience in the Vietnam War. It was very painful for public opinion. And remember, you had embedded journalists back then, and Americans could really see the blood. I mean, really the massacres, you know. Now it's different. They just investing. They creating invest into the opposition, creating chaos, civil war. They finance terrorists, but they don't want to be directly involved into the war because it's easier and it's better for public opinion. So I think it's failing. I just don't understand why they're going. It's a vicious circle, and it's a huge spending. I mean, we're talking about trillions being poured in the Middle East for creating chaos. Now, 20 years later, what happens is that you have countries that shifted completely. I mean, they were never pro-US, but they shifted completely. We're already talking about reconstruction of Iraq, Afghanistan, Syria, and also them joining the Belt and Road initiatives. Who's the winning? China. They're shifting towards China, and they know the future is with China, and they are going to benefit from the Belt and Road Initiative. So now we have to ask the questions: why this war? What did you win from your war? I mean, except one thing is that they, I just wonder sometimes if they're not using those wars as a training ground. A great army, a powerful army is powerful because it has experience to be in armed conflict. Same as Israel. Maybe having a constant tension in Israel and being in a state of war makes Israeli forces one of the best army in the world because they're experiencing war the whole time. Same as the US. It looks like a training ground. But in the meantime, what we don't talk about is the millions of lives destroyed. Not only the killed. It's not, there's probably 1 million people that died in the Iraqi war. But think about all the lives destroyed. Because the economy is completely destroyed. Now, Libya is a failed state. It was the richest country per capita in Africa. Now it's a failed state.
Absolutely. And that was a really good point about, what are they trying to accomplish by this? And it's so clear that they're failing. And I honestly believe that you have to think the war on terror started in 2001. And I believe that was a blitzkrieg, a geopolitical global blitzkrieg by the US and its allies in the so-called international order. They were trying to clear out everything and consolidate control over the planet after the collapse of the Soviet Union before the rise of China. And it's very clear that not only has Russia re-emerged and China has risen, the time has run out. Time has run out for them. And so they're meddling. And another good point you just brought up was them honing their military skills. Well, now Russia is honing their military skills in Syria. Hezbollah is now all over the region, not only accumulating huge amounts of military experience, but also establishing infrastructure, defensive infrastructure across the entire region. This notion that the U.S. is going to ever turn this around, I like to use the word, well, I don't like to use the word dangerous fantasy, but that's exactly what it is. And I want to show one more thing before we move on to the main topic. This is an article that I have cited 1 million times in my writing about the Arab Spring and the extremism that followed. A lot of people were skeptical at first that the US engineered this years in advance. Take note of here, let's get it all the way up on the screen here. This was 2007. This is by Seymour Hersh. And he's talking about, what's the title? The Redirection. Is the administration's new policy benefiting our enemies in the war on terrorism? And I want to point people's attention to this paragraph. To undermine Iran, which is predominantly Shia, the Bush administration has decided, in effect, to reconfigure its priorities in the Middle East. In Lebanon, the administration has cooperated with Saudi Arabia's government, which is Sunni, in clandestine operations that are intended to weaken Hezbollah, the Shia organization that is backed by Iran. The U.S. has also taken part in clandestine operations aimed at Iran and its ally, Syria. This is a very important point here. A byproduct of these activities has been the bolstering of Sunni extremist groups that espouse a militant version of Islam and are hostile to America and sympathetic to Al-Qaeda. And all throughout the rest of that article, and I highly recommend people get a hold of it and read it, they talk about how the U.S. was working with the Muslim Brotherhood, which is like the political wing of Al-Qaeda, basically. And they were setting this up inside Syria years in advance. And I've also pointed out how the U.S. State Department was training those fake pro-democracy activists, bringing them over to the U.S., training them. They were meeting with executives at Facebook, Google, Twitter, and they were getting all of this training to go back and overthrow their respective governments. And then they had these militants ready to take advantage of the chaos. And that's what it was supposed to be, knocking down all of these governments, putting in client regimes, cultivating this huge mercenary army of militants, sending them into Iran and then into southern Russia. That was the whole plan. And obviously it didn't work. But this is a good way to illustrate why Russia is so interested and by necessity in Syria. And the U.S., how flimsy this excuse is that they're there to fight terrorism. They created the terrorism very deliberately, years in advance, and they're perpetuating it as a pretext to stay there, to stay in Iraq, Syria, Afghanistan, and anywhere else they can get their foot in the door. Angela, anything else you want to add to this topic before we move on to the main topic?
Well, look at the population of the U.S. It's we're talking about 4% of the share of world population. So they're trying to be the largest superpower with only 4% of the world population. So I think it's not sustainable. It's not working. How can you have 4% of the people ruling over the 100%? It's not sustainable. And I think there are too many wars. And maybe what is happening now, the disengagement of the US in several places, it's maybe a refocus on China. That's the way I look at it, because it would be impossible for the US to be some kind of confrontation in the South China Sea if they are already massively into the Middle East. So I think it's a good thing that there is a disengagement in the Middle East, but maybe there's worse to come, and it's going to be a shift towards the China area, sadly.
Yeah, and also, though, I mean, the U.S. says they're pulling out of these places. There's been a huge drawdown in Afghanistan, but people should look into the so-called green zone in the capital of Afghanistan, how massive that is, and they're not leaving that. And there's a main road that goes to the international airport, and that's basically a U.S. military base. And the U.S. Army Rangers can get over 2,000 elite soldiers to Afghanistan in less than a day, and then tens of thousands in a week. So they're not really leaving anywhere.
Yeah, and it's
really
being privatized. It's being privatized. So they used to have the army fighting their wars, and now you have I don't know what's the proportion, but it's huge. It's privatized.
We'll never know. We'll never know the full size.
Yeah.
Go ahead, Angela. I was just going to say we don't know the full size of the
No.
armies.
What is this black? That
Blackwater.
Blackwater. It's huge. We don't know the full size. I mean, there's a large size which is mercenaries working for those American companies, private, but then you have those mercenaries just being paid by Qatar, by the Saudi Arabia. I mean, tens of thousands. I mean, in the whole region, it's tens of thousands.
Yeah, exactly. So I think that leads in, though, perfectly to our main topic, because you're talking about the U.S. Having to reprioritize their obsession with the rise of China to take some pressure off of the Middle East and place it in the South China Sea, maybe. Because I pointed out, China already has a larger navy than the U.S. And the U.S. Navy is spread out all over the world. It's not like they would be all in the South China Sea fighting China, because then they wouldn't be anywhere else. This is the problem with having a huge empire. Let's start by doing this. So for people who don't know, the Chinese Communist Party is 100 years old. And people who are not familiar with the Chinese Communist Party, or people who hear the word communist and start having like sweats and their chest starts tightening up because the word communism scares them, the Chinese Communist Party has evolved and changed and reinvented itself many times over the last century. And China today is not the China of Mao Zedong. It's not the China of 100 years ago either. And you'll never hear this explained by the Western media, because the Western media wants you to be fearful of a rising China, because the Western media represents Western special interests that are trying to still contain China. So this is the BBC, and we wouldn't expect anything fair from the BBC. 100 years of Chinese history, and this is the only thing they have to say about it. CCP 100, she warns China will not be oppressed in anniversary speech. And the first thing they say, the first sentence, China's President Xi Jinping warns that foreign powers will get their heads bashed if they attempt to bully or influence the country, which, Angelo, we were kind of talking about this the last 2 days, about how it's normal for any country to warn other countries that if you carry out aggression against them inside their territory, they will defend themselves. They will bash your head. How is that any different than the U.S. is posturing, other than the fact that the U.S. postures on a global scale, and China is just warning about people aggressive against them in their territory? Angelo?
Well, I've read the speech of Xi Jinping in Chinese, and it was very clear. It was all positive. The whole speech was extremely positive, and it was about the way China sees its contribution, but in a global sense, how it can contribute to the world. And then towards the end, China said, "Well, we will not accept to be bullied again." I think is referring, of course, to the 100 years of humiliation. Keep in mind that there was a long time ago, in 1900, there was the 8 Nations Alliance. They tried to cover China. They came into China and they took concessions. Hong Kong was taken 50 years earlier. Japan had taken Taiwan. They just covering up of China. And what Xi Jinping is saying is very simple: is that this is not the China you had. You took advantage 150 years ago. It's a different China. We've learned from history. And when he's saying about, he uses a metaphor of you are going to hit your head towards a wall of 1.4 billion people. It's taking to the context that we are going to protect our country and our own sovereignty, because China is all about sovereignty. It's a country that is focusing on itself. It doesn't want to expand. It wants to focus on bringing prosperity to its people. There's a social contract between the population and the CPC. It's very simple. You deliver and you got the whole power. You keep on doing your good job, you got the whole power. And that's what we call the Chinese social contract. And they've been delivering. People are happy. There are Harvard studies saying that over 95% of people are happy with the system. Nowhere else in the world you have people that are so much supporting of their political system. And again, we're criticizing the system because it's not the same as ours. But again, Western political systems and also Western values should not be applied to other countries. that is so arrogant just to try to impose on other countries our system. And our system is failing. If our system was a good example, okay, well, we could imagine trying to export it, but even, why export it? This is like imperialistic mind. And the good thing with China is that it doesn't want to export it because it's wise. It sees it doesn't want to be like the USSR tried to do. They tried to export communists, and I think it was a bad way for PR. China, they say, well, you know what? We are focusing on ourselves. Our system work. You want to learn from us? Well, it's okay, but we don't want to expand it. And they're delivering, and this is embarrassing from the West. When you look at like homeless in the US, people not having this whole social welfare, this Medicare, still the only country that doesn't have access to free, to basic human rights. I mean, those are basic human rights. So it was a very interesting speech. And again, I think we need to talk about achievements. Just a few figures. 100 years ago in China, there was only 10% of literacy. 10%. Now it's 100%. Life expectancy doubled in 100 years. And I mean, GDP, if you talk in terms of PPP, purchasing power parity, China has become the largest economy in the world. It's all about great figures. There's a long range. But the most important is that people are happy under the system. I just want to say another thing. There is 130 million people in China that travel abroad. Well, 130 million people go back to China. If China was not good, they will try to emigrate. 20, 30 years ago, a lot of Chinese had the American dream. They would go to the US and they tried to get a green card and stay in the US. Most of them, they go back because opportunities are in China. So I think it's just it's important just to look at facts on the ground, and the problem is that the narrative is being controlled by people that have no knowledge about China, have never been to China, and they just they watch a few movies, Hollywood movies, a few books, anti-China books, but the reality on the ground is mind-blowing. You fly to Shanghai. That's a very good example. I had some customers flying to Shanghai. They arrive into extremely modern airports. After that, they take a bullet train, which takes 400 kilometers per hour. Then they arrive in Pudong, which is it's a land. There was no building 30 years ago. Now it's full of sky. It's much more impressive than Manhattan. So a foreigner flying to Shanghai, in the first 2 hours of his experience in Shanghai is a mind-blowing experience. He's going to review everything that he's learned about China. He's going to be like, well, you know what? This is not the China that they told me about. It's not the China they told me about. So what I want to advise people is that you want to learn about China, go to China, try to have an open mind. The problem is that we are using Western lenses to look at China. That is wrong. That is wrong because, we are all different. If you want to be objective about China, you need to look at China with Chinese lenses. That's the only way. So it means like just having an extremely open mind, because again, the world is complex. There are different cultures, different values, and China is one good example. And I think what we should do is try to learn from what they did because they've delivered.
All very good points, and actually that was my first experience in China. Was I took a ship from Japan to China, and it went up the river and docked right in the middle of Shanghai, and I've never seen a busier city in my life. And just like you said, everything that you think you know about China just evaporates because now you're seeing it for real. And then you already at that time, I knew the Western media was lying to me about everything. But just like you said, you don't know until you go there and see for yourself exactly how badly you've been lied to. And you meet Chinese people that friendly, they're hardworking, everybody is busy and doing stuff. At that time, the high-speed rail wasn't built yet, but they had advertisements for it because I guess it was in the middle of being built. And now they have the largest high-speed rail network on Earth. Countries like the US don't even have a kilometer of high-speed rail. And when you're traveling across China, because I did by train, you see new and old, and you can see the process that was going on. These people being lifted out of poverty, infrastructure being built to improve the lives of these people. And then I went through Laos, and this was goes back to our conversation about Tibet, how you used to do that bus ride, and it took I think you said 30-something hours?
36 hours. Golmud to Lhasa, 36 hours. Now I think it's a couple of hours by train. It's just crazy. The changes it's just amazing. It's amazing.
So to go from the Chinese-Lao border to Vientiane, the capital of Laos, which is near the border with Thailand, by bus on the old roads, it took 3 days. And as you were going through the mountains, you would come down to like lower areas, and you would see this construction of this highway. Chinese construction companies were building across Laos. Now that trip takes a day, 1 day by bus, and they're building a high-speed rail through Laos now. So it won't take a day; it'll just take hours. So it's incredible. It's not just the transformation of China, it's the transformation of, because you were talking about exporting a system of government, which is what the US does. That's what the National Endowment for Democracy does. It's exporting US administrative structures into other countries so that the US can run by proxy. China doesn't do that. They export infrastructure, products, technology. This is what they do. They don't even have the institutions to meddle, even if they wanted to, which I think they should keep it that way. I want to go back to this article here. People who don't know, 100 years ago, China was this humiliated colony of Western interests. The UK had taken Hong Kong from China. There was the Civil War, and the U.S. helped the Taiwan basically separate from mainland China, and this is a point of contention to this day. And go through this BBC article. They don't say anything positive about China at all. So Angelo and I, we were just talking about. So people watching this can understand. We were just talking about all these amazing things that China has done. You could do a whole hour talking about what they did just in the 21st century, let alone the last 100 years. All the BBC can find is alleged human rights abuses, crackdown in Hong Kong, vowing to take Taiwan back. And we've already talked about Taiwan, how it's already de facto integrated with China's economy. And as the years go by, China doesn't need to invade. This is maybe off topic, but the U.S. wants China to invade because it's the only way they're going to stop Taiwan from reuniting with mainland China, because otherwise it's going to reunite with China. So they needed some sort of conflict to stop that, because otherwise the natural course of economics and development, Taiwan is going to reunify with the mainland. And we come down here, and they talk about that comment. Anyone who dares try to do that, to oppress, bully, or subjugate China will have their heads bashed bloody against the Great Wall of steel forged by 1.4 billion Chinese people. And again, Western audiences reading this article don't understand the scale of humiliation that China suffered at the hands of the West. And in fact, still do. What was the name of the Huawei executive that got practically kidnapped in Canada at the behest of the U.S. government.
So it's Meng Wanzhou. She's actually the CFO of Huawei. She's actually the daughter of the founder, and it was just a whole setup. And actually, HSBC probably under U.S. threats, they collaborated, but actually the whole case is falling apart. So they're being accused of dealing directly with Iran, and it's just a kidnapping. I think it's a very big stain for Canada, especially for Canada. Actually, under Canadian law, it's not even legal what they did. So there were, because, and plus there's no case. That's the problem. It's extremely embarrassing for Canada now. They're holding Meng Wanzhou and there's no case. The case is falling apart. The same as Assange. Now things are coming out that actually was a whole setup and lots of just people being paid just to build up lies, to tell lies. And the case is falling apart. So it's just kidnapping. I mean, you are kidnapping the daughter of the founder of one of the largest companies in China. I mean, what are you expecting? There's going to be a retaliation of China. But again, China is very smart, extremely smart. You know, they focus, they are not giving you the reaction you're expecting them to have, because they're not even going to give you that satisfaction. You took Meng Wanzhou, okay, we are going to find, we are going to take a countermeasures. But again, there was this talk, Trump used the word decoupling. Well, China has been diversifying its economy for a long time. They've been investing for 40 years already in Africa. In Africa, they started this relationship with Africa a long time ago. So they were prepared for that. It's not like in the US, they're taking it's 2-3 years visibility. It's election visibility, only 4 years. And even the decisions you take for the 4 years are going to be completely erased when there's a new president. Well, China was already prepared for that. So I look at this as China being a chess master. When you want to be a chess master, you have predicted already your adversary moves well in advance. That's what China is doing. So what is missing in the West is a vision, long-term vision, and some kind of strategy. It's just, I don't see any strategy. Nothing makes sense. Whenever it comes to their own countries, what's your vision? What is your vision you have for the US? There's nothing. Do you have a vision for the US? In China, they are making plans for the next 5 years, 10 years, 50 years for the next generations. In the US,
absolutely
nothing. No visibility. What is your vision? We're talking, what inspires people is vision. You see it in business too. If you have a business, you say, oh, I want to make money. How much are you inspiring people working in your company? It's the same for a country. What is the vision? What is the vision for your country, but also for the world? And what I like to Xi Jinping, what he says whenever it comes to vision for China, he say it's an ambitions. He's saying, well, China doesn't have ambition for China. China has ambition for the world. That is so inspiring. It's not about us. I mean, of course, first it's about, prosperity to its own people, delivering. But then when you look at the Belt and Road Initiative, what it is about, it's about bringing prosperity, but also most important, it's about connecting. You connect and you have trade, then the probability of war is lessened. And of course, I'm not a globalist. I think globalism, we are going to extreme when it comes to globalism, the trade and so on. We need to somehow to protect. There are some industries you need to protect. You need to be self-sufficient whenever it comes to strategic, industries, especially food. It doesn't make any sense. There's a few things that I don't agree with globalists, but building roads and connect people. And I think this is a vision. This is a great vision, and I like the idea of just having ambitions for the world.
So that's a good point, and I want to get right back to that. But I just want to circle around to the humiliation of China, the Opium Wars, Britain seizing Hong Kong. We were showing how Western powers wanted to divide up China amongst themselves. And remember, this was at a time when Western countries still had colonies. Even the US had colonies. The Philippines was a US colony, essentially. And so that was then, and then they're kidnapping Huawei executives. That's meant to humiliate China. These sanctions are meant to humiliate China, to make China look like a pariah on the international stage. And the US coerces its allies to go along with these sanctions, or they will get sanctioned. And there's a very thin veneer there, but for ordinary people, and you see a lot of people in the West falling for this, they really do feel like China is some sort of threat. And of course, just as you were saying, I read the speech also, President Xi Jinping's speech for the 100-year anniversary of the Chinese Communist Party. And I didn't see anything in there about Chinese leadership or having to outdo some other country. They were talking about contributing to the world. They were talking about the One Belt, One Road initiative by name, how they wanted to connect and trade and share their prosperity. And when you really think about it, it's not them being charitable. They know that in the long run, that is the most sustainable way to build wealth for themselves as well. We could see the US, an incredibly wealthy country, but now it's in irreversible decline because the way it was obtaining that wealth was unsustainable. Let's go back to this BBC piece, and then there's this analysis down here, which is completely useless. China has repeatedly accused the US of trying to curb its growth. And you see this very often in the Western media. They're acting as if China's imagining this, as if the US is not actually trying to curb China's growth. And to dispel this, all we have to do is come here. This was President Biden's America's Back speech just earlier this year. And he the first time he talks about China, he's talking about American leadership must meet this new moment of advancing authoritarianism, including the growing ambitions of China to rival the United States. What that right there means is that, and then he's also talking about the determination of Russia to damage and disrupt our democracy, which is just complete nonsense. And what Biden is saying and what Trump said before him and Obama and every US president, because Wall Street and Washington in general have thought about this for decades now, containing China, is that America should run the planet and they will not allow any other country to surpass them. And now China clearly is poised to surpass the US. So there's this psychosis that's setting in where they don't know what to do. They don't want it to happen. They cannot accept it happening, but it's going to happen nonetheless. So Angelo, I mean, this is where all of this is coming from, right? All of these accusations, human rights, it's a dictatorship. All of this it's just this huge smear campaign. The Build Back Better world, all of these things. It's basically the U.S. flailing. It's a spent empire flailing because China's surpassing them.
Yeah, I'd like to draw the parallel with the Opium War. Actually, what is happening now is not much different. We are talking about a huge trade deficit from Western countries with China. And so basically China is beating Western countries in their own games. The World Trade Organization was created by Western countries, was a Western countries initiative. So that's the game of the West, and China is winning over this game. I want to draw a parallel with the Opium War. Why did we have an Opium War? China was selling lots of porcelain, ceramics, silk, tea to the UK. And so basically the UK was paying in silver. So you had a huge amount of silver that was going from the England to China. And in return, China was not buying anything. It didn't, what the UK, England had nothing to sell to China. So what England did to China, it forced China to buy opium. And this is how the opium war started. So what we are living now is not much different, is that there's a huge trade surplus from China. And what the US was hoping is that China would recycle its trade surplus in terms of currencies. So when you have a trade surplus, you end up with lots of reserve currencies. So the US was hoping that China would just recycle its trade surplus into the US. So it's the Ponzi scheme. You keep on having this Ponzi scheme. It didn't work with China. China, what they did, and I think for the US, it was a casus belli, a case for war. But it doesn't say it. But it's for the US attacking the dollar, and this Ponzi scheme, it's attacking the core essence of what the US is about. It's about the dollar hegemony. So China, what it's doing is using its close to $1 trillion per year trade surplus into the Belt and Road Initiative, into financing solid assets around the world and connecting. It's with one stone, it's killing many birds. Its Belt and Road Initiative is going to help Chinese economy to export its overcapacity. Then it's going to enrich those countries because once you trade more with China, there's going to be a win-win. They'll be able to sell also to China. So there's a shift there. And then the third thing is the third bird killed is that you are contributing slowly to the de-dollarization. Because keep in mind, the dollar, what it does is that it allows the US to have to live at the expense of the rest of the world. Because you see what happened during the COVID. You need money. What do? You print dollar, and it doesn't have a real effect on the world economy. You can do that. While if the dollar was not the global currency, what would happen is that you would have hyperinflation in the US. So they're taking advantage of the dollar. So this is the real war. And everything what we're hearing about China in terms of human rights, abuses, whatever lies they want to say, it's not this. It's the US is being hurt, and it's China indirectly is challenging Americans' hegemony. But again, China is winning with the game of international rules. China is good at business, and they're hardworking, they're smarter, and they have a system that allows them to do planification, to be much stronger. And again, it's not a system for the 1%. It's a system for the 100%. It's working.
And you were talking about the dollar, which is definitely a huge battleground. But I want to show, we were just talking about how the BBC is pretending China is imagining the US is trying to curb its growth. But here we see President Biden saying that that's exactly what they're going to do. And then I want to show a couple of things. We talked about the Tibet high-speed rail. There's this huge airport, and I don't think that people realize how huge the civilian air industry is in China. They're moving towards 1 billion passengers a year. And that is a huge market, and it will surpass the US very soon. And China has their own commercial airliner manufacturers, and one is called COMAC. And here, Trump administration adds China's COMAC and then Xiaomi to Chinese military blacklist. So they're saying COMAC is somehow connected to the military, human rights, national security threat to the US. but actually COMAC builds civilian airliners, and the civilian airliner manufacturing is currently dominated by a duopoly, Boeing and Airbus. These are Western corporations. COMAC right now is not a threat to either one, but we see how huge the domestic air industry is in China. COMAC is going to meet the demands there, and then eventually their aircraft are going to be proven, refined, and they will be being built on a scale that will rival Boeing and Airbus. So these sanctions are not designed because of human rights or national security threat to the US. It's a threat to their monopolies. You were talking about the dollar hegemony. Boeing and Airbus, their duopoly over commercial airliner manufacturing. This is what the US is doing. This is why they're doing it. They're doing it to preserve, desperately to preserve their monopolies over everything. And again, we were saying over and over again how unrealistic this is. China is a country that has many times larger population than the US, and all things being equal, they will have a bigger economy. Their industry will be bigger. They are going to surpass the US. This is not something you can stop or contain, but that is exactly what they're trying to do. We had a couple of other things to show, to illustrate where China is right now. 100 years of the Communist Chinese Party. Where is China right now? They're building their own space station because the US would not give them access to the so-called international space station. So they've built their own. These 3 Chinese astronauts are in space right now on the beginnings of their space station, which they will open to nations, all nations. And they already have even countries in Europe signing up to do experiments on the space station. This was one that you, Angelo, a mega dam on the Great Bend of China. China has many dams in China. They're building dams in places like Myanmar. The US is trying to stop this. They use very flimsy human rights and environmental excuses to try to do this, but this really is about generating sustainable energy, flood control, irrigation across China and beyond. Angelo, would you like to talk a little bit about this article?
Well, this is mind-blowing. This is the Yalong Trampo Dam. It's in Tibet. And well, keep in mind, Tibet is one of the largest, probably the largest reserve source of water in the world. And this dam is actually enormous. The largest dam so far is the Three Gorges Dam, and it's actually, this one will be 3 times the size of the Three Gorges Dam. This dam alone will cover 4% of energy consumption for whole China. Can you imagine? When we talk about renewable energy, this is a mind-blowing project. And again, the scale is just mind-blowing. So this is one of the examples of the achievement in infrastructure that China is doing. So this is also part of the goal of China to attain by 2060 carbon neutral economy. So again, great examples. But again, the scale of the project, you need to go there and just to see with your own eyes. It's just enormous and huge achievement. In terms of infrastructure, they are doing things that no other countries has done. I remember when they were trying to do build some roads in Tibet, long time ago. Actually, they went to Switzerland just to see because the biggest the most difficult infrastructure project whenever it came to building tunnels was in Switzerland. So the Chinese, they went to Switzerland to learn from Swiss, but now it's the student has become the teacher. It's completely different now. If people, engineers in infrastructure, they want to learn about infrastructure, now they have to go to China to learn. I just want to go back to everything that how the West is bullying China. China say what China is doing is using setbacks to create opportunities. Those measures have countermeasures. Microchips, you don't allow China to buy high-end microchips. What China is going to invest into microchips is going to be much bigger. Every time you have those sanctions, China is going to get back and is actually creating those new opportunities. You don't allow China to be in the space agency. You kicked out China from that. They are going to go alone, and they are going to go further. The US is talking about Mars. If you look at the next missions, the next 50 years, China is already talking about Jupiter. They're talking about Jupiter. They're so far ahead. So far ahead.
And just as you were saying, think about COMAC, right? If they're going to put sanctions on COMAC, China could easily just start to restrict Boeing and Airbus, have COMAC fill in the demand as their capacity grows. And then in 10 or 20 years from now, does the West really believe that they're going to be in a stronger position and have more influence over the world and all of these nations that they've been coercing all of this time, or less influence? By the time COMAC comes full circle and they're producing aircraft on a scale with Boeing and Airbus, do you really think that the world market for commercial airliners, they're not going to want to buy COMAC? So the US is missing a huge opportunity here. They could be growing with China, but they're not. They're going to do this spiteful, nasty, protracted campaign against China to try to contain it, which is impossible. And then they're still going to lose. Plus, they have created this animosity between themselves and China for no reason at all. It's a very counterproductive process. But people who study history, they'll remember how belligerent and irrational the British Empire was as it was collapsing, and every empire throughout history. And now we're watching it again in our lifetimes. We're watching the American empire collapse, and we're watching the same irrational reaction to it, this inability to adapt to the world's changing. I say this many times, and I'll say it again. The US needs to find a place in this world among other nations rather than trying to impose itself upon all other nations. If people take the time to read that speech from President Xi Jinping, he's not talking about a Chinese-led international order. He's just talking about how China can contribute to the world. And if the West took learned something from China, they would also have something great to contribute to the world. Right now, they have become the single greatest threat to peace, prosperity, and stability. Angelo, anything else before we start to wrap this up?
Well, what you said just before, it's all about looking at history and what China is about. When you look at China for a long time, we're talking about 2,000 years, China and India, they were the largest superpower. Their GDP was about 50 to 60% of the world's GDP. China, when Christopher Columbus went to America, discovered America, the ship of Christopher Columbus was 10 times smaller than the Chinese ships. Chinese ships, they were all around Southeast Asia, even all the way to Africa, but they never colonized it. What they did, they created, trading outposts. They wanted to do trade back then. And what happened with China is that it's only getting back its original position. What happened is that there was an industrial revolution in England, and China missed that. And because of that, it was attacked. So it made only, in 2,000 years history, it did only one mistake, was to miss the industrial revolution. And China is not going to do, again, that same mistake. But again, look at history. When did China attack other countries? The last 50 years, they had skirmishes with India, with Vietnam, just a small conflict. I mean, just nothing. well, look at the West. How many times we have overthrown governments, we have attacked. How many people died over the last 50 years? It's just ridiculous. Us trying to lecture China, it's stupid. And it's lose-lose. I mean, we just, I think the West, and especially the US, is looking like a wounded dog, and it's all about just doing desperate things. While at the same time, you focus on fighting China while China is actually fighting on its own. It's focusing on its own people and prosperity. And every year that passes by it goes in favor of China, because China is showing the world and is delivering to its people. While in the West, we are into failed democracies by the 1% for the 1%. I was just looking this morning at the Forbes top 100. Well, you look at you don't have any in the top 10. You don't have any Chinese. The first Chinese come top position of 13th position. And when you look at those richest Chinese, they have no word to say in Chinese politics. On the contrary, they need to have low profile. While in the West, everything is controlled by the richest people. Think about how much power Bezos, Zuckerberg, they have. It would be unthinkable in China. This is why, that's one of the major differences between this Chinese system and the West. It's not capitalist in the sense that you don't have people with money that can control politics. This will never happen in China, and people would never accept that. So when you look at the Chinese Congress, well, it's extremely representative of the people of China. You have all the social constituencies. You have blue collar, white collar. You have minorities. It's huge. It is extremely well represented of the population of China. Well, if you go to U.S. Congress or the U.S. Senate, most of them are all multimillionaires. They make a lot of money by the technique of revolving door. They go back and forth. They go into politics, then they go to private, they go to politics, and every time they go to private, they're getting the bribes or payback for the job they did for the elites. And so what they call in China corruption, in the US, it's called lobbying. It's just, they just appropriate themselves the words, They define, how semantics work. You appropriate yourself the word democracy, and then all the rest is authoritarian. Well, I see in many ways China is way more democratic than the system we have, especially in the US. Again, I take the example of the US because it's the extreme. It's quite extreme. There are many democracies that are working in the West. I'm thinking about Nordic Europe, Nordic countries, Switzerland, New Zealand. They're working quite well. But to say that the US is a democracy, it's an insult to intelligence.
It is. Well, we covered a lot of ground. We've talked about 100 years of Chinese history under the Chinese Communist Party, how it went from a bullied colony to a global superpower poised to surpass the United States. And we've talked about how they have a much larger population, huge industry. There's no reason why they shouldn't. And I don't understand why the West has this problem with China surpassing them. It only makes sense. It's not like it's unfair. It's a much bigger country. They should have a bigger economy. It only makes sense. And we've talked about how it really is about the West, this imperialist history of theirs, and their inability to truly, they preach equality, but they don't practice it. They really do see themselves as superior, and they cannot tolerate a nation like China surpassing them. But there will be in the video description this really excellent talk by Eric Lee with the Foreign Correspondents Club of Hong Kong, and he's barraged by the most ridiculous loaded questions, and he makes them look very foolish, and people should watch that. The link will be in the video description below. He gives a very good a sketch of the Chinese Communist Party, how it works, how it's transformed itself over the last 100 years, why it is the way it is, and how, just like you said, Angelo, how it's probably much more democratic than a lot of systems in the West. And as you've said many times, he also says this about, it's about results, and nobody can go to China and see with their own eyes and then come back and say China's government isn't delivering. It is. And that's why countries are doing business with China, and why the West is having this meltdown, because there's nothing they can do about it unless they just constructively participated, but that's beyond them. So I think, anything else, Angelo?
I just want to add, just before closing, you and I, and this is for our listeners, we are not anti-West, anti-US. What we want to do is here expose, and it's a language of peace. I think if we bring some more understanding of what is happening, maybe we can avoid war. It's because this is the danger, and this is our fight. So it's not about bashing our origins and so on. I think we still love our countries. Brian, you still love you the US and your country. The problem is that we have a problem of government. There's a problem of imperialism, and we really need to avoid war. That is our fight.
Absolutely. America is a huge country. There's over 300 million people there. It would be profound ignorance to say, oh, I hate America, because then you're lumping all of those people in. And I'm so upset with the US government and the tiny, less than 1% that are running the country into the ground, because 300 million people, that is a lot of wasted potential. And I know that there are a lot of hardworking, clever Americans that have a lot of good ideas and a lot to offer. Americans that, despite what is happening in the West, are still contributing positively to the West. So that's why I always say America needs to, I don't want to watch America run into the ground and in ruins. I want them to find a place among, I really believe in multipolarism and a balance of power, a real balance of power among nations. I don't want a global leader, Joe Biden talking about American leadership and an international order. I know what is happening in Washington and on Wall Street is not in the best interest of Americans, and obviously not in the best interest of any nation that crosses America's path and ends up in ruination. There's a long and ever-growing list of those nations, and that is exactly why I do what I do, because I don't want to see any more nations added to that list. I'm definitely not anti-American. And Angela, I've heard you talk quite often about Switzerland and all the positive things there. That's a Western country. So yeah, we really are talking about multipolarism. We're not glorifying China above all other countries. We're just kind of pointing out how the West is completely lying about China, mischaracterizing it. You saw the BBC article, how one-sided.
Again, you were talking about media. We saw the shift of public opinion, Western public opinion, when it comes to China, and of course it's worsening. Every day it's worsening. But again, this is the work of media. They're putting those articles. Oh, you see, China is being pictures of as a hegemonic country, bad. It's all bad. It's all China bad. Well, what are you expecting? This is the Western media that is doing this job, and we are trying to bridge, and to give the other side of the story. Again, China is not perfect. China has its own problems, but it's nothing like how it is portrayed by Western media. It's not like this.
Yes. So I think we're going to end it on that note. Again, I'm going to put in the video description this talk by Eric Lee, because anyone who's interested in how the Communist Party works in China and how it's reinvented itself over the last 100 years, he breaks it down very, very well, and he defends it very well against Western criticisms, the typical criticisms we see. Also in the video description you can find Angelo's social media accounts. You can follow him on social media. all of the links to everything that we've talked about will be in the video description below. I want to thank you, Angelo, once again for joining me. I really value your insight, especially about China, because you've lived there and you're going to return there if you can once this COVID thing passes by. And I want to thank everyone for watching, sticking up with us to the end, and we will see you next week. Bye for now.
Bye.